Okay, so we're here as part of the Future Marketing video series, and we're joined today by Ryan Clarke of Statsports. I'm sure most of you will be aware of the brand of Statsports and the great work they're doing with some of the best teams in the world, so it's not a bad job to have, and hopefully we'll be able to get some information from Ryan today about his role and some of the campaigns that you're running. So do you want to start off, Ryan, by telling us a little bit about your background and before you ended up at Statsports and how you've got to the point that you have?
Yeah, so I studied at Queen's University and did business management. I think we had one marketing module, so it was kind of a roundabout way of getting to the digital marketing field. And while I was doing that in final year, I was doing a bit of freelance stuff on the side. It was around the time when every business wanted to have a social media page that was producing content all the time. So we were kind of jumping on the bandwagon of, we'll do your Facebook, we'll do your Instagram for you, creating that content and give that sort of personal connection and creating website content and stuff like that. So that was kind of my first touch point with digital marketing in a sense. And after I graduated, ended up going to New York, got the opportunity to move to New York, work for Rex Architecture. And I was doing a lot of sort of creating project proposals, but also trying to articulate their digital voice. So what they were doing on social on their website and trying to make it a bit more palatable for a broader audience, which was good. Because Rex Architecture is it's in a unique brand in terms of the language that they use, so they're trying to reach a wider audience, which is a challenge, especially in New York when everyone's like 24 hours a day, like work all the time. And then in the evenings I was doing my postgrad in international business at the same time, plus trying to do all the socializing in between, obviously the most important part in New York. So transitioned from there back to Belfast, bit of a culture shock, reverse culture shock again. And worked for Queen's University as a digital marketing officer there, focusing on international campaigns in sort of Southeast Asia, China, India, Middle East, that type of thing, recruiting international students. And then sort of the Statsports thing, when I saw it, I just thought it's a unique position to be in when you see a company that's absolutely like the best product in their field. So ignore the brand, ignore all the other frills. When you take it down to the bare bones, like this is the best product available. And being able to market that. Don't get me wrong, like there's companies that do really good jobs in terms of their branding with a good product, but you're not going to be a great company unless you have the best product. And that was a really good opportunity for me that I could see. It's like, well, I could get into the space with the best product and be able to market that. So that's kind of how the Statsports thing came about originally.
Okay, very good. And then, I mean, the Statsports stuff's all very visible. I mean, you can't turn on Sky Sports now without saying something.
Yeah. Sorry about that.
No, it's great. On their Twitter feeds, I probably watch too much Sky Sports anyway. Can you talk us through, some of those campaigns you've worked on and show us in practice what that concept of understanding buyer intent does, which is, I know, is a lot of work you've been doing in the last year?
Yeah, so it's kind of a unique position for us because on one hand, we're doing a lot of education-based content. We're creating campaigns that are purely prospecting, get in front of that first interaction with a potential customer and educating. So we're trying to build a Statsport brand first of all, and also trying to build a category that didn't really exist before. So the idea of a GPS tracker is known in terms of your Fitbits and your Garmins, but in terms of a team product that someone's wearing, it's a bit of an unknown and it's hard to target in that sense. So we're educating on one side, spinning this wheel here, and also trying to convert on the other side. So all our campaigns are kind of built in that sense where we're prospecting, we're building education, we're setting them on an alignment of different campaigns and different content they're going to see here. But then once they reach a certain point, we'll be going into conversion mode with these types of campaigns. So there's always a misconception, I feel, in digital marketing that you've got a one chance, you've got a one shot. Like you see the customer has to be the right, perfect time, perfect platform, and you have to grab them that moment. When for us, we know it's more like we got 4 opportunities, we got 4 touch points. We can educate them and bring them on a journey and show them certain messages that perhaps they are interested in, more of a logical message or more of an aspirational message, motivational, and bring them on that journey. And then we know when they get to a certain point of interaction with the website that we can push to convert them. So all our campaigns are built in that kind of sense. We use the premise that we use is kind of the Stanford Persuasive Lab, Persuasive Tech Lab analogy, which is when you're trying to influence someone's behavior, persuade someone, which essentially marketing boils down to. So behavior equals motivation, ability, and prompt. So that motivation aspect is your buyer intent. So how motivated is that customer to actually purchase? So it's how they view your value proposition. And that value proposition can change. So in Ireland, our value proposition could be way up here, like really, really strong. Whereas if we go into a completely new market, that completely changes. It can change in time of year. So like during an off season, it could be lower, but going into Black Friday, it could be super high seasonally, and also it could the platform that you actually use itself could also influence the motivation or the buyer intent. So if you're using display ads that are intentionally interruptive, where someone's viewing some other content and you see an ad and it's going to be a low motivation, low intent kind of platform, whereas a search, if someone's searching for Statsports, if someone's searching for like a GPS tracker, we know that their intent is extremely high and it's a lot more valuable. So even with that in mind, in terms of our Black Friday campaigns, we started our Black Friday campaign, well, it's Black Friday, could be Black November, could be Black, I don't know, Q4 at this stage, like the amount of campaigns that are being extended now. But we started ours back in October and started November as well, building that education piece, because we know that that's a low intent period. People aren't going to purchase necessarily during that period, but they're encouraged to actually interact with content and learn about it. So we're building all that content into our campaigns and focusing on little micro conversions that might not necessarily relate to revenue. So we're focusing on things like what product views, number of product views, add to baskets, our lead gen aspect of building an email list, all preparing that customer with multiple touch points when we get to Black Friday and their intent to shoots up for actually purchase. So the budget spins towards prospect and education, and then when we get into the Black Friday phase, we're actually spinning all the way back to conversion based, being way more direct with the content and their journey. So we're skipping them to their product page, we're investing in remarketing a lot heavier in search, because we know this is the period when people want to buy. So you can see the level of intent that changes throughout the year, and it's for us is identifying it seasonally where we invest in terms of prospecting campaigns, education campaigns versus conversion campaigns, and spinning both wheels.
Is that something that you've got a lot of buy-in for internally? Because I know there's an awful lot of I mean, there could be people watching this who are one-man marketing teams in small businesses. And while all of that sounds very, very good and very attractive, I can imagine the reaction if a solo marketing person in a small business was pitching an idea to the board or the MD that for the next 2 months they just needed to concentrate on awareness because nobody was going to buy anything, and they needed quite a substantial budget to do it. Has that buy-in always been there with Statsports, or is that something you've had to work to develop?
I think an element of it is building that trust as well, but personally, I feel really lucky in terms of like the senior team, the executive team really buy into what we're trying to achieve. They understand the seasonality of when the peaks and troughs are going to be in terms of conversion rate and buying intent. And it is an education, but I feel personally lucky that I've been given sort of the trust, and our team has been given the trust to actually go about that process. In terms of pitching it, I think if you can pitch it in a simple way, in terms of you given that understanding of when the motivation is high to buy, it's not going to be the same throughout the year. Using your data from previous years especially is the absolute foundation, backbone of how you're forecasting the next year, and using data with your own personal experience at the same time to pitch it is key, I think.
I suppose, I mean, the whole Statsports product's built on data anyway, isn't it? The whole premise of the product is the access to the data that it's given sports people to allow them to be better. So I suppose it's not a massive leap for that data focus to then transfer into the marketing activity as well.
For sure, yeah. So Statsports is born digital. That's what we always say. Sort of, it's a data first kind of company. But that doesn't mean that people within the company with their own expertise aren't relying on that kind of anecdotal and experiential kind of knowledge at the same time. So we all understand that even in sports science, data can only bring you so far, but it's actually your sports scientists, your team, that interpret that in a certain way, and how well that they work with the data. It's that combination of the two that is actually key. So that's the philosophy kind of works through the business, regardless of if you're a sports scientist or account manager versus like someone in marketing or finance. So.
I mean, it sounds like a fairly complex creative process that you're involved in then, with all the different messages, different touch points. What impact has that approach on buyer intent and the different stages of the journey had on a creative process in terms of the number of assets that you actually have to create now?
Yeah, I think since I started Statsports, that's been one of the biggest changes I've seen. So I'm extremely lucky that we have an unbelievable creative team that really buy into the process of. We know that we don't want the customer to see the same first message as they see the same fifth or the fifth message that they get. So we want to send them different messages along that journey. They really buy into that in terms of like the segmentation that we go through. So even splitting in terms of the gender, sport, different demographics, they need different messages. And that does increase the amount of assets. We're also on a lot more platforms than we've ever been before. So we're on the display network. We're using YouTube, we're on social, and these all require different dimensions and different types of creative that might have to emphasize different things. So for campaigns or a campaign theme for a project, we could be using 200 to 300 different assets. And that's a big ask from a creative team, especially when our creative team personally are focusing on creating like that really cool, innovative content, but they're completely aware of like the effect further down the line in terms of digital of if that content's in that dimension or at that length, or if it shows this brand image or this type of content first, with sound, etc., how that impacts click-through rate, how it impacts conversion rate, and the time on page people spend on afterwards. And for us, I know that we're investing so heavily in digital. I think anyone who invests really heavily in digital marketing need to understand that the creative has to come with it at the same time. So it's almost directly proportional the amount you invest in digital marketing as you do in creative, because like the need for personalization is just sky high. Like the customer expectation to have something that's bespoke just for them, or it appears to be bespoke just for them, is so high. So the amount of creative that people need is just exceptionally high at the moment to be able to give that kind of customization the customer needs. So I'm fortunate to be part of like a creative process where a team really buys into the digital campaign aspect as well as creating something that looks really cool at the same time. So
it seems to me in the last 12 months, I suppose there's been a bit of a shift in the way particularly video content's been used online, and that, you know, up until relatively recently it was create one asset and try and ring the chamois, try and get as much as you can out of that single asset. It seems that there's been a move towards learning from TV advertising quite a lot in terms of how advertisers on television would have approached the sequencing and the delivery of messages. Is that something that you've seen or you've experienced given the contact that you have with people at Google and YouTube and things?
Yeah, I mean, it's not a one size fits all anymore by far. So like the content we're creating in a paid social campaign, we're going for like a 1080 by 1080 format. We want to take up as much space in that feed as possible, but we also know at the same time that the majority of people won't listen to it with sound. And the type of people that interact with that, it's slightly more interruptive. Whereas when we're working into these YouTube campaigns, it's obviously 1080 by 1920 format, it's wider. 96% of people listen to YouTube ads with the sound on. So you've got a completely different audience. So yeah, the experience you bring in to those types of campaigns is that it has to be bespoke. You can follow the same theme, but it has to be tailored to that individual. Otherwise, you're not going to get the person clicking on it or taking the action or getting the right education. Otherwise, they're just going to be 5 seconds in pressing that skip button. In terms of sequencing, it's completely incomparable to TV, because TV is almost like this is your broad brand message. Like this goes out to everyone. Whereas the likes of YouTube, like what we can build with a YouTube remarketing campaign, is completely beyond that in sequential marketing. So we know that we send someone this message for their first interaction. Once they visit the website, they'll get a different video message. If they interact with that one, or if they don't interact with that one, they'll be moved on to the sequence into a different pot where they'll get a different type of video. So we're just trying to target people, first of all, based on demographics that we think they'll be interested in. But once we target that demographic, we know it's all about buyer behavior. So someone could be an 18-year-old football player, a female football player in the US. That doesn't mean that she's going to think in the same way that someone else thinks in the same demographic. It's kind of targeting their behavior. They might be more logical in terms of their brain, This one might be more aspirational, motivational messages, and try to get that emotive thing across. So we're sending different messages all the time that we have the ability to do with the likes of YouTube and Facebook, and put them into different remarketing pots based on their behaviours, which is cool.
Again, going back, I mean, it's going back to the point of the complexity in the process. So can you give us a bit of an idea of the sort of team of people that are involved in the creation of the campaign, from getting the data in the first place to creating the assets and then rolling out the campaigns finally?
Yeah, so we have a relatively small team in terms of what we're trying to do in global campaigns. We've got a team of around 10 in-house, and that comes from, we've got 3 creative guys, we've got a digital team, we've got a UX, and then obviously like clear like head of marketing, marketing assistants, etc. In terms of projects, they're declared kind of at the start of the year when we know when certain trends are going to come in, and then the themes come based on what we feel would be best throughout that year. So in terms of project management, that's something that's identified really early on, and we know what events are coming, what key campaigns we need to put out there, and then the creative comes next. We also work with Groundswell, who, in my opinion, are just the best e-commerce agency in the country at the minute. The quality of thought that they bring to the conversation as well, especially at those early stages, is absolutely phenomenal, and they've got access to obviously all the cutting edge Google products, etc., which is a real advantage just because we've got the best tools then to work with before going into campaign. Another aspect of the team that we would bring in that maybe not a lot of people would is the customer service aspect as well. So we're really encouraging in terms of customer feedback and reviews, and getting that loop, because we know that building those trust factors all helps with our actual conversion of the campaign. So we know if we're keeping the customer happy, if we're getting that feedback and reusing it, we're able to actually improve our campaigns and improve the product at the same time. So as a team, we've all got our specialities, but we're really, really bad at keeping our own lanes. So there's a huge amount of overlap. So someone might be involved in copywriting or the organic social aspect of it, but they'll also dip into the actual creative aspect. Creative will work with digital in terms of like that combination of the logical mindset of, if I'm going into a campaign, I'll know that an animated display ad will get a better click-through rate, versus that creative person who has their own spin on what should be shown in that and what the sequencing of that should be shown as well at the same time. So we are a small team, but we do overlap a lot, and I think that's key, that you don't go like this. In Statsports, it's completely almost against the rules to say that's not my job. Like, we don't have that kind of mindset. So as a marketing team, that's the way we work as well.
Okay, I mean, you mentioned Groundswell. I mean, how important do you think those, good quality agency relationships and bringing those external skills in are to the success that Statsports is having?
Yeah, I think, like, I've always been a person that's thought that building that in-house team is absolutely key. It's your foundation, and it absolutely is. And always been a little bit skeptical of agencies in the past, but working with the likes of Groundswell, you get an understanding of someone who's on the absolute cutting edge of the products that are coming out, that have that strategic knowledge, and being able to work that with the in-house knowledge that you already have. So no one's going to ever know the product as well as a marketing team that's in-house, but that agency with the external knowledge and having a wide view of the entire market and different types of markets and what works well and what doesn't work well in different combinations, it's a great combination to have. And I would push anyone to build a really strong internal team, in-house team that they're really happy with, but also bring in that agency knowledge when they need it in areas that they need it, and especially in e-commerce, like Groundswell. For us, like, they were definitely the right fit for us. So that combination is working really well at the moment.
And I suppose, going back to having a look at some of the campaigns you're running, as you touched on it earlier when you said the data is only one part of it. The interpretation of that data is a very important consideration, because the data is just information. Then it's very much a human decision as to how you take that information and move on.
Yeah.
How do you set that up? We've all probably heard of the dangers of the last click attribution model and mistakes that have been made by big brands in terms of how they've been assigning attributing success to certain channels.
Mm-hmm.
How do you make sure that your model is attributing the right level of credit, if you like, to each of the different touch points throughout the campaign.
Yeah, and I think it was Adidas originally that mentioned their sort of their focus or their mistake to focus on last click attribution a bit too much, and those conversions that they felt were key to bringing in revenue and ignoring the likes of video and brand building type content. In terms of attribution model, I think the first thing is to always be skeptical of the platform that you use to collect it. So whether that's an ad manager, if it's Google or Google Analytics, you got to know that there's a reason why things are attributed in certain ways, and that's to just have that in mind. In terms of attribution, when I'm describing attribution, I always think of sort of the Ireland rugby analogy in terms of who would you say is your most valuable player for Ireland? Would it be your Johnny Sexton or your Jacob Stockdale? So if you're looking at those two players and you're using a last click attribution model or you're using your Adidas model, you would obviously go for Stockdale every single time because he's scoring all the tries, he's getting all the points. But if you had a team full of Jacob Stockdales, there would be no tries. Well, there might be a couple of tries. There might be a lot less conversions. There might be a lot less of the goals you're trying to achieve because you can't exist with a team of 15 Jacob Stockdales or the last click conversion, those key platforms. Whereas a Johnny Sexton, you wouldn't measure his career based on how many tries he scored. So if you're doing a prospecting campaign, there's no reason for you to sort of manage them or measure them based on the amount of revenue that brings in. So it's essentially splitting your conversion to splitting your attribution based on what's important to that campaign. So for us, if we're doing a prospecting campaign, if we're doing an education campaign, we really focus on those micro conversions. So if we're doing different prospecting campaigns across display, social, YouTube, we're looking at the product views, the add to baskets, we're looking at the email subscribers, everything like that, because we know that the top of funnel stuff, exactly, because we know that there might be a small amount of conversions that come through, but really all we're focused on is that first interaction and encouraging them to educate themselves, as opposed to your paid search, which we know is the poacher on the goal line that's going to score the goal at the end. So that's measured. We measure that on revenue, on conversions, etc. But when you're splitting your attribution model, it should be based on what you're actually trying to achieve with that campaign.
Okay, and of all the creative formats that you use, is there a particular one that stands out, or is it very much a horses for courses, depends on channel, depends on the stage of the buyer journey?
I think for creative formats, the tips I would probably give are if you're using display, we've always found that animation works better than static. It sort of grabs people's attention a bit more. With paid social, we're going for 1080 by 1080 every time. We're going for more of an animated, and we're going subtitled because we know that people aren't listening with the sound on. So we want to take up as much space in that feed as possible. We want to show them the content without them having to listen to it. And then with YouTube, it's all about that 5-second period because you've got 5 seconds with them in that ad before they skip. So it's getting your brand into that 5 seconds straight away. It's getting your sound optimized because you know they're going to be listening. And it's something eye-catching to get them to continue on and to interact with it beyond that 5 seconds. So it does depend on the platform, but there are different tweaks that could work for you and could work for someone else based on the dimensions and the type of content you're trying to create creatively.
And again, in terms of Statsports, there may be people watching this who think, yeah, but I mean, look, they're a mass market consumer brand. You know, they've got audience size of millions, so running retargeting campaigns is much easier for them than it is for us. Do you think access to a huge audience is an essential ingredient for a successful remarketing campaign?
I'd probably first I would probably contest the idea that it's a mass market audience that we're targeting. So, okay. I think I saw a stat that half the world's population have got an interest in football or soccer, which is just ridiculous. So if you think of the pool of that audience, there's only a tiny percentage of that are actually participating and playing, which are the people we are interested in. So in terms of targeting the first off, we're actually going for a lot smaller of a market and a smaller of an audience out of a potentially large market than expected, probably on the surface of it. But for say a remarketing campaign, the audience doesn't. You don't have to have a large audience to create a really effective remarketing campaign, but it definitely helps in terms of the segmentation that you can actually achieve. So like for the likes of a sequential remarketing campaign that's automated and based on sort of their proximity to the website, so how recently they visited the website. We really target that 7-day period, so we know that that person's more likely to convert in that 7-day period than they are maybe further down the line. But if you don't have a pot big enough for that 7-day period, you can't do the same messaging as you could if you had a larger one. So for us, we really focus on 7-day messaging, and then we move them, if they don't interact with that, we move them into that second pot and then further down the line. So we know if they don't engage with that messaging, that's not for them. They'll be moved into a different messaging pot where we're showing completely different theme. It could be like a testimonial or a trust building kind of message. If they don't interact with that, they'll move into a different pot. They maybe get a sales message, they might get something completely different. But it's identifying the different themes and different motivators for that person based on their behavior. Because yes, we've identified the demographic, we know exactly who we want to target in terms of a person, but we don't know what motivates them to actually purchase. So having the size of audience is key really for that segmentation and getting really custom messages, but you can still create something really strong, even in an email flow, like a welcome series email flow, to educate that person as well as remarketing, because it's still can be really, really effective, essentially, yeah.
Okay. And I suppose just to wrap up, Ryan, in 2020, what's the big project for Statsports in 2020, if you're allowed to tell us?
I don't know what I'm allowed to say, but I know that my targets are pretty big, so I'm sweating a little bit going into the new year. No, but we've got some really, really big plans, and the exciting thing for me is that the idea in Statsports that we don't really have a split in terms of this is digital marketing and this is traditional marketing. We have a marketing budget that is really, really diverse. And that's one of the things that comes through our whole marketing team, is that we try to identify the elements of the marketing mix. We want to get in front of the customer when they're making a decision, wherever they feel comfortable in that environment. So things from, we've got our digital campaigns, we've got our YouTube. We had a meeting with Google last week on YouTube and paid search that was really, really strong and exciting for next year. We've also got that traditional element of experiential stuff, like outdoor advertising. This type of thing is also going to be brought in because we know that repetition of message and interacting with multiple touch points for a customer, the more touch points they have with us, the more trust they'll have in the brand, the more likely they are going to convert. And that's what we've seen through the last year. So we're trying to do what we did last year, went really well, and just like explode that outwards essentially, and try to reach them in as many places as possible.
Okay, yeah. Thanks very much, Ryan. It's very interesting talking to you.
Cool.
Thank you.